Well, good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a good Tuesday so far, a good start to your week. We're coming with the second of our series on Nehemiah here this morning. And as we get into this second chapter of Nehemiah, we're going to be introduced to what I'm going to call the second of our two main themes that we're going to be following as we work our way through the book of Nehemiah. Now, last week we talked about prayer. Prayer is something that Nehemiah does regularly, and we see an example of that in chapter 2 that we'll talk about here in a minute. Last week we saw sort of a focused, dedicated, specific length of time spent in prayer as Nehemiah tried to sort out what he should do about this news he had heard of Jerusalem and the state it was in. This week we're going to see an ongoing reliance on prayer in the life of Nehemiah, but it's going to look a little bit different than last week. So we'll talk about that, but the main thing I want to talk about this week is leadership. Leadership is another key thing that we see in the book of Nehemiah, something we see done well. And as we get into this week, we're going to see some principles that I think I'm going to say we can all take to heart, because I think everyone is in a position of leadership. Now, you can challenge me on that if you want, but I think everyone is in a position of leadership of some sort. You might not be in a formal position of leadership, but if you're a parent, you're in leadership. If you have other siblings, especially younger siblings, you're in leadership. If you have groups of friends, sometimes you're the one to take leadership and others follow you. Sometimes these are positions that we seek out and we realize that we have leadership in. Other times we don't even understand the amount of leadership we actually have in that situation. But there's principles that we see even here in Nehemiah chapter 2 that I think we can all take to heart. Excuse me, things that we can be challenged in as believers, especially when you couple it with Nehemiah's focus on prayer and following God and being obedient. There's just some good things we can learn about leadership here. And so Nehemiah chapter 2 starts in the city of Susa. Now, Nehemiah, we learned last week, is the cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. He's heard about the state that the walls in Jerusalem are in. It's burnt down, everything's really bad, and he's heartbroken about this. And as he appears before King Artaxerxes one day to do his duties as the cupbearer, he is sad. Now, this might not seem that serious. What's the big deal if he's sad? Being sad and being sort of down in the face in the presence of a ruler like Artaxerxes could be playing with your life, really. If they saw you as someone who is trying to maybe manipulate the king, or just someone who is sad in the presence of a monarch like this, that was not taken lightly. That wasn't appreciated. You weren't supposed to show your emotions in that sort of a sense, and yet Nehemiah chooses to do that here. The king notices, and the king asks him, what's going on? This sadness looks like it's something deep. It looks like your heart's troubled. Let me know. Why is your face sad? What's going on? Nehemiah explains to the king that he has heard about the state of Jerusalem, this city that means so much to him and to his people, and the fact that it is in such a state of distress and disrepair and just a crumbled mess, basically, makes Nehemiah sad. And it's what's bothering him. It's what's weighing on him here as he appears before the king. And so the king asks him, well, what's your request? What would you like to do about it, right? And that's kind of an interesting thing to see how God is working behind the scenes and opening up the king to this request. And at this point, Nehemiah does what I call one of his sort of bow and arrow prayers. This is terminology that I think I made up, or I might have heard it somewhere, but basically the idea here is last week we saw him set aside dedicated time to focus on prayer, right? This was time by himself, a lengthy period of time where he could set aside and just pray about the situation. Here, the king asks him, what is your request? And Nehemiah doesn't have an hour to go and sit and pray about it. He has to respond right away, right? And so we see him praying to God, a quick bow and arrow shot up into the sky, and then he goes ahead and makes his request. Prayer can work in either of these ways, and I think works best in a combination of these. If all you ever do are just sort of these heat of the moment prayers, it's not that God can't answer them. It's not that God doesn't answer them, but I think we miss out on some aspects of what prayer is. And if we think that we have to have an hour set aside to pray about something so prayer is effective, we're missing the ability of God to work in these spur-of-the-moment issues or situations. And so Nehemiah does this. He shoots a prayer up to God and answers and lays out this request that he wants to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild it. Now the Lord is obviously working in this situation. He allows King Artaxerxes to look favorably on this request that Nehemiah asks for, and he promises, yes, you can go. Nehemiah sets a time and says, I'll be gone for so and so long, so the king knows he's not just running away. And the king sends him on his way with letters which would guarantee a safe passage for Nehemiah, as well as permission to use building materials from the king's own forests and supply to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. Eventually, after a substantial trip, Nehemiah makes his way to Jerusalem. And this is where the leadership aspect starts to show itself, where Nehemiah's good godly leadership begins to shine, really. He gets to Jerusalem, he's there for 3 days, and doesn't say anything to anyone about why he's there. He doesn't come in with guns ablazing and expect people just to sort of jump on his side right away and say, yeah, we'll rebuild the walls. He wants to understand what he's up against here. And so after 3 days of being in the city, one evening, one night, he goes out unannounced, doesn't let anybody know where he's going, takes a few men with him, and they ride around the walls of the city just to see exactly what they're up against. How broken down are these walls? Is this, do we have the material for it? How are we going to instruct people to do it? They just wanted to seemingly wrap their minds around what exactly it was they were up against here with this broken down wall. And then, after doing that, it's at that point that Nehemiah calls the people together and explains why he's there, that he's come to rebuild the walls of the city, obviously with the help of the people of Jerusalem, but he also equips them with something interesting as he shows them and he tells them that the hand of the Lord is with him, but also he has come with the blessing of King Artaxerxes. This is significant, and we get a little peek at why it's so significant right at the end of Nehemiah chapter 2, when two men who will be sort of the antagonists of this story, a man named Sanballat, another one named Tobiah, they come and they start trying to get people maybe a little bit uneasy about this work, and they say the king's going to hear about this, so Artaxerxes is going to hear about this, and he's going to take this to mean that you're wanting to rebel against him. They're trying to sow fear, they're trying to get people distracted, but Nehemiah can answer with full confidence, and this is exactly what he told the people of Israel as well, the people of Jerusalem, that this is not your thing, for starters, for Sanballat and Tobiah. This is none of your business. This is what the Lord has called us here to do. He knew that Artaxerxes had given him permission to do this, and he had also equipped the people of Israel to know that by explaining how the king's hand had blessed him as he came in this as well. And so that's, when we think about leadership, a big part of leadership is equipping those who follow us, those who we're leading, to be able to succeed in whatever it is that we're leading them in. And obviously the type of leadership you show and the circumstance you're showing it in will depend how you equip those people to succeed. But Nehemiah doesn't just expect the people to blindly follow him, right? He surveys the situation, he understands it, and then as he's pitching the idea to them of rebuilding the walls, he makes sure that they understand that the Lord's hand is in this. And we also have the blessing of King Artaxerxes, who at this point had that reigning power over Israel, over Jerusalem, as it was a conquered land at that time. As far as application goes this week, two things here real quick. First of all, we see the balance of prayer here, right? Last week we saw the focused time of prayer. This week we saw sort of the quick heat of the moment prayer. And it's just a good reminder that we can and should use both in our walk with God. Have those disciplined, regular times of prayer, but then when you're in the heat of the moment, before you answer, just, Lord, please help. Give me the words to say. I'm not sure how to handle this situation, and then trust that He will help you. That's a good example to follow. And as far as leadership goes, and this is something that if you want to comment on this, if you want to discuss a little bit, either in the comments under this video or give me a call or an email or something this week, is in the positions of leadership that you have. Remember, it doesn't have to be formal leadership, just in the positions of leadership that you have. What are some ways that you can equip those who are following you to succeed in whatever it is? Just think about that a little bit. Look at Nehemiah's example. Think about what are some ways that you can equip those who are following you to succeed. And maybe it'll help to think about a person who's been a leader in your life who has equipped you to succeed. How could you apply some of those things to those positions that you find yourself in? Just some things to think about, maybe a little bit more practical application this week than other times, but still very much something that's connected to following God. And yeah, just some things to think about here this week. Hope you have a great week, and thanks for joining me.